Welcome to Asian Book Club, where we highlight Asian and Asian American authors. We are your hosts,
Jamae and Sabangan.
And I'm Stephen Park, and we're coming at you today with our new book, Disorientation by Elaine Shea Chu. And we're going to our first read, but one of the first things that we notice within this read is that Elaine is at a college. It's one that is seemingly somewhat prestigious, but maybe not. What do you call that?
The Ivy League school?
Yeah, it's not an Ivy League school. So you grew up on Guam. So I'm wondering how your experience was and if it differed to my experience. Because as an Asian American here, first gen, my parents were adamant that I went to an Ivy League school or a top school. We even had this, not a charter school, but something similar to that where you had to apply to get in. And that was my goal from kindergarten through 6th grade of like, you need to get into this school, which I didn't. But it always was a goal of like, you need to be at certain schools. Did you have anything like that?
What I remember, my parents weren't adamant about getting into a specific school, but they wanted me for sure to get into some kind of university. They were certain not wanting me to be in a community college, for sure. But university was the thing. Like, even if it was University of Guam, if it was a university that was in California that was not well known, but it's still a university, that would have been okay with them.
So just kind of any university.
Yes.
It was interesting because I feel like, I don't know, because the way I grew up, by the time I was in high school, I was doing SAT prep classes, and maybe even started in junior high, but the whole goal and focus was get into these certain schools. And I guess the secondary thought to that is so you can get certain jobs, but you need to go to these elite prestigious schools.
For sure.
I think the reason my parents did that, and maybe a lot of other parents also pushed their children to do this, was because that's what they knew.
Like name recognition.
Right, but not only that, but in Korea, you only have a certain amount of schools because, Korea is so small.
Yeah.
Your identity is somewhat related to the school that you went to. Like, that show that we watched with the zombies, it was the K-drama.
Yeah.
There was a guy who was like a police officer, and his identity was Seoul University. Yep. It wasn't anything else, but this guy's name is Seoul University.
Right.
So I'm wondering if that's what drove my parents to be like, you have to go to Harvard, you have to go to Yale, even Stanford, which was like, for them, it was like, this is a backup school. I'm like, no, it's absolutely not a backup school.
No.
But I wonder if that was the drive behind them trying to find security in this place that they didn't know well, they didn't know how to navigate, but they're like, if you go somewhere with a prestigious name, you'll be able to get a great job and have a great life and things like that.
Right.
The problem is, having now lived in America and grown up in America, what we now seem to realize more and more of is there's a lot of nepotism involved with Ivy League schools. There isn't necessarily just job security with going to a great school. It's much more what is your family's name. And so the reason why people from Harvard and Yale get picked to do these CEO jobs is because their parents have done that job.
Right.
They're usually and often white males that have come out from that same university that their fathers have come out from.
It's who you know and how you know them.
Right. But there is a certain sense of, if you go to Harvard, everyone knows what Harvard is. You will be able to get a job probably a little bit more easily than someone who went to Cal State something, or a state school, community college school, something like that. But truly, for me, I went to not an Ivy League school for grad school, but a pretty prestigious school, and paid way too much money to get this education. And I don't ever really get asked, besides by patients, like, what school did you go to? It seems very meaningless, and seems like I would make the exact same amount of money, have the exact same amount of life satisfaction, maybe not have built up the memories if I didn't go to that exact same school, but I don't think I would have missed out on anything.
For sure. I went to University of Guam, and I didn't have the dorm experience, but do I feel like I missed out on things? No, I definitely I didn't party. I did hang out with friends. I know that my mom listens to this. I did not party. I hung out with friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I missed out on anything, even though University OG is not a well-known university. But it's fine.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about similarities to no matter what school you go to. You're still going to experience the stress of education,
right,
which we start to get from this book.
Mm-hmm.
But before we go into the book, let's talk about our recommendation for the week.
Mm-hmm. Our recommendation for the week is Bel Canto Books. It's a woman and BIPOC-owned bookstore led by Joanna. They sell books, they partner with fellow BIPOC vendors, they hold literary events, and they host book clubs. There are 3 locations, and we found this out when we went to California, that there are several locations housed in different businesses, and you can support them by purchasing books through their bookshop or checking out what's in stock at the Hangout branch online, which usually has signed copies, or you can just visit one of the 3 locations. You can find more through their website at belcantobooks.net, and you can follow them through Instagram at belcanto, BELCANTO books.
Yeah, and like Jamae said, we had the opportunity to go see them, and we were able to meet Joanna, who was just this lovely person and kind of had, I don't know if she's ever going to listen to this, but she had this air about her that was just like very powerful. I don't know. It was very weird.
Sure.
But she was so sweet, so nice. She helped me pick out books for my nephew because it was his birthday. And so she's very knowledgeable about different authors and the different things that you might be looking for just by giving her a topic or something you might be interested in.
Right, and I especially appreciated that she focused on local authors in California and Long Beach area.
Yeah, and so that's Bel Canto Books, and that's our recommendation for the week. Okay, so this is our first read of Disorientation by Elaine Shih Chu. I'm going to get a lot of... I don't know if I'm ever going to get her name comfortably correct. So if I'm saying it incorrectly, I'm really sorry. I am trying. There are probably lots of edits within the post-production of this. But our first read has been...
Our first read was in part 1, which is Fall Quarter, pages 3 through 82 in the hardcover. And for everyone, chapters 1 through 5, which is from the Curious Note to the Versatility of Tampons.
And there is a little slight bit of content warning. It's not very extensive. It's not as graphic or vivid as our last book.
Yes, this one was a very quick mention.
Right.
And almost more of an allusion to it rather than a direct saying of abuse.
Right. And so, yeah, that involved abuse, not spousal, but
it
partner.
Is domestic abuse.
Yeah, domestic abuse. There you go. What is your first impression of this book?
So, to be very honest, I had to read the first 3 chapters 3 different times. I tried the first 2 times just listening to the book, and it's not the book, it's me. We were on vacation when we first started the book, so like we mentioned, we went to California, and my brain was all focused on being in California, so reading it on the plane, I fell asleep because that's what I do when I'm on a plane. I tried reading it in the car, which again is where I fall asleep, so that was not helpful. It wasn't until we got back to Portland where I was able to pick up the physical book and read it while listening to it at the same time, and that was what focused my brain. So my first impression of the book is that I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the character of Ingrid, who is the main protagonist, and we'll talk about her more. And it brought me back to university years, and I'm like, yes. Although I stress during university, I thrive under that stress, and that kind of reminded me about how I want to get my PhD one day.
And for me, as soon as I picked up this book and I read the first few pages, maybe even the second page, I felt like this was exactly the book that I was hoping to pick. It's not a light read. It is kind of a literary fiction.
Yes.
So there is a lot of depth to this book.
Yes.
But it is an enjoyable read. There's
absolutely
humor, there's complexity.
Yes.
But there's also a lot of fun within this story.
I think so, yes. Like the asides that are made and like the little beats in between, like the actual action is like, yeah, I can see the quirkiness in the book.
And through the character, too.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's start there, because I think our first major thing that we are introduced to is Ingrid's character.
Yeah, Ingrid Yang is a grad student working on her dissertation, and we find out very quickly that she's insecure and easily manipulated into situations.
Right. So let's even just talk about how did she come to this dissertation, because that was a lot of what the first chapter was focused on.
So long story short, the advisor that she initially wanted to choose told her to choose a different advisor, and that advisor, whose name is Michael, chose the dissertation for her by strongly suggesting Shea Wen Chow.
Right. So her first advisor, Judith, even put her down this rabbit hole of 1920s silent Japanese film, which she was not even Japanese.
No.
This also then led to her having her next advisor, who his name was Michael Bartholomew. I asked you this briefly when we were reading it, but I've only known one person with the last name of Bartholomew in my life. And that person was Filipino. So when I was first reading this, I originally thought that Michael Bartholomew was Filipino.
I mean, it could be when I initially read, because of the way that he interacted with people, and also because of a certain part which we'll get to later. I think Michael's white.
Oh, yeah. Fairly quickly, I found out that he is extremely white.
Yes, but I totally get where you're coming from, because when you asked me that question, that's when I was like, well, I do know people who are Filipino with the last name Bartholomew.
So it's like, maybe it's like a Spanish last name kind of thing.
Maybe.
But anyways, side topic.
Yes.
But through these two people, we find out that Ingrid is somewhat manipulated into choosing her dissertation topic and the route that she's going to go.
Yes. Which doesn't bode well for her. She becomes bored really quickly, and throughout the first few chapters that we read, we know that she's not interested in this topic. She just goes through the motions, and she doesn't even have a title for her dissertation right now.
Right, she's struggling.
Yes.
One of the quotes is, Ingrid Yang was not doing well. She talks about how she's hoping to develop ulcers just to get out of the amount of stress that she has.
Yes, and she's replying to Michael's emails by saying that she has a stomach flu every single time. And has no pages to share with him. So that shows her being manipulated. Another thing is her insecurity. She, in page 23 specifically, she changes her undergrad major so many times, and one time she changes her major just to follow around her boyfriend who doesn't communicate with her.
Right.
So she's constantly needing this validation that her relationship is fine when technically she's the one making it not fine.
Right. And on that note, there are 3 or 4 boyfriends in which she goes into some detail with.
Yes.
Which are all terrible relationships.
Exactly.
And all of which where she is somewhat seeking a form of validation, and she is trying to seek their love and attention in different ways.
Right. And even though she is validating towards them, they tend to not validate her in return.
Right. That seems to be the theme of her relationships.
Yes, exactly. Until she meets her fiance, Stephen Green.
Right. To go back to even her feeling like she needs a certain form of validation, and this is more from the scholarly perspective. There's a quote early on, and this is on page 7, and it reads, "She arrived at college missing half the baggage they'd been prepackaged with. Then, too, was the latent fear someone like her was not supposed to be good at English. In first grade, she'd been placed in remedial English, not because it wasn't her native language, but because she'd been too shy to speak up in class. Then in 6th grade, her English teacher had accused her of plagiarizing her of Mice and Men essay on the grounds it was, quote, suspiciously articulate, end quote. I think this kind of tells the story of her current journey.
Yeah.
It's her trying to live up to these expectations when it sounds like she's already there. It's just now people are trying to control her and have her do things in certain ways.
Right.
It's also really interesting because I know that story's not unfamiliar. I've heard of so many people that have gone to different schools, and just because of the way they look, they're like, well, you should be in a lower class because you clearly don't speak English. And I was kind of the same way, where I didn't like speaking up in class because I was always shy in larger spaces. It's more on the side of my introvert nature of who I am.
Yeah.
And so, I wasn't dumb. It's not that I didn't know the answer. I just didn't want to raise my hand or speak up in class.
Same, very similar. And the whole part about her teacher thinking that she plagiarized just because she was too quote-unquote articulate, I have had that experience both as myself as well as with friends who their professors were like, oh, you can't have written this. And I'm like, yes, I did write this. Or yes, they did write this. Just because we look a certain way doesn't mean that we can't write scholarly.
So, this is how she gets to where she is. But like Jamae mentioned, out of all of her bad relationships, she finally finds a better relationship. I was going to say good, but it's not good either, but a better, more caring relationship in Stephen Green. Also, he spells his name wrong. Let's get that straight. So, PH never makes a V sound. This is, I stand firmly on this ground. I want to change my name from Stephen with a V to Steve, spelled STEPH, because apparently this is what people... Anyways, that's my soapbox. But Stephen Green.
And we'll talk a little bit more about him later. But just as a quick summary about the relationship, Stephen Green seems to be very... I guess you can say caring, but also super motherly or nurturing towards Ingrid, to the point that it's almost coddling.
It is. I also feel like it works in certain ways. Like, it's what Ingrid didn't get from all of her previous relationships, and especially in this time where she's struggling with a different part of her life.
That's fair.
I do think that Stephen, in that way, is a necessary balance for everything that she's going through.
Definitely. I agree. I think that he's the best she has ever had in her life. I also think that he might have yellow fever because of the way that he not only interacts with her, in that he doesn't really ever call her by her name. He always calls her dear, which I think is why, in my mind, that kind of rang alarm bells. Like, does he really care for her as a person, or is he just like, oh, we could fill this position with anybody else, but she's the one who is here right now. But yes, that's my little rant on Stephen Green. So we see that Ingrid is insecure. We see that she's easily manipulated. But one other thing that I noticed about her character is that she enjoys simple joys. For example, and I'm going to point these out because I have similar joys. On page 25, I'm reading directly from the book Under Fall Quarter. After that, Ingrid did not date anyone for a year and a half. This was during her time that she was not dating great people. After that, Ingrid did not date anyone for a year and a half. She began to actively cultivate her spinster wardrobe and visit animal shelters, calculating that if she adopted a cat every 7 years, she'd accumulate a respectable number before menopause. I greatly appreciate this because if I were single, I would also be calculating the same number. And another one where we see her simple joys is on page 28, not too far off, where Stephen shows her evening clothes and Ingrid's reaction is this happy cry because, quote, she believed matching outfits for couples were the height of romance. And I'm like, yes, even though Stephen does not agree.
Yes,
and Stephen Park does not agree.
I do like matching. I just don't like matching full outfits. I think there's a difference. I think coordination is much more cool than just matching, and we do have events where we match.
But also, when we coordinate but are not completely matching, when it's off by just a little bit, even then Stephen Park does not like it.
Yes. But if we go to places like Disneyland or Universal, we'll buy matching shirts.
Uh-huh.
So I do have my moments in which that's a thing.
Yes.
Anyways, there was a moment with Stephen Green and Ingrid where this is the proposal that they go through.
Yeah.
And I thought it was kind of funny because Ingrid has this expectation now that her relationships aren't going to go well.
Right.
So Stephen invites her to, was it Olive Garden?
No, it's Imperial. It's a Chinese restaurant.
Right. So he invites her to Imperial, and he is, he's setting up this whole meal. He's getting ready to do this whole proposal.
Yeah.
But the whole time, Ingrid is anticipating a breakup.
Yep.
But in my mind, I was like, why are you dressing up semi-formally and eating a full meal? Is this how people break up with other people?
I don't know. Maybe this is just a her thing. Because that's not how I got broken up with before. But since we're on the topic of the proposal, there's also a very, weird... This is how I know that Stephen Green has some yellow fever, because of the way that his parents interact with Ingrid. On page 43 of the hardcover, it says, Stephen's mother says, "You two are so brave. I know interracial couples aren't accepted everywhere in this country." She blinked rapidly to ward off any unscripted emotions, clasped Ingrid's hand, then after a minute went on, "But your love is stronger than hate." Ew.
And I think she even then went to reemphasize, so incredibly brave.
Right. Oh, so gross.
Yeah. I had the same thing down in my notes. It was icky. It reminded me of Little Fires Everywhere.
Yes.
Like, it seemed like they could have came from the same town.
Girl.
But, yeah, so that's her story.
That's her character.
But let's talk about where this book seems to be going. And that's with her trying to finish this dissertation of Xiao Wen Chao.
Yes.
We find out that she's struggling through this, right?
Absolutely.
So it's not something she even wants to do. So she's going to this library often, and she's trying to piece together any information that she can get to actually finish this dissertation.
Right. And she constantly visits the archives, in which she's doing her due diligence of being present and doing her research and trying to write something. And one day, when she visits the archive and gets the archival box, she finds one of her old notes where she's copied a full Zhao Wenchao poem, written on the margins of it, her thoughts. And one of the thoughts on page 18, she says, stanza 3 has 16 syllables, stanza 4, 21, stanza 5, 19. If the speaker moves north 16 degrees, then west for 21 degrees, then south for 19 degrees, Chao's mother must be from Shangluo Shui. However, in that same note, someone else's handwriting is underneath that says, "No, stupid, it's Shaluo Shi," beside a smiley face, which kind of looks like a smirk. So, this launches her into a completely different side quest.
Because the person that wrote this note was Retlaw equal no speak.
And that kind of got her stumped for a long time, but because of my love for palindromes, I already knew that this was a backwards name.
Right. I think it took me like a full minute or two, maybe 2 minutes, where I was just like, oh, everything's just backwards. So it's Walter Luke Gibson.
Yes.
So that wasn't the surprise of this, though, is she finds Walter Luke Gibson. She's able to Google and hunt this person down.
Yes.
And she gets to be able to actually talk to him eventually. And we find out that Walter Luke Gibson is a quote-unquote...
pen name.
Is a pen name for a quote-unquote East Asian man.
Right.
And he talks about... And this is another thing that I think is fairly familiar with Asian Americans or Asians in America, where they use white or Caucasian sounding names so that they can sell more or be more successful. I mean, honestly,
Right.
it's the reason why my parents gave me the name of Steve or Steven. It's a name that's very familiar to white culture.
For sure. And very side note, I, for a long time, struggled with having my name because all of my name, except for Anne, is not anglicized. So anytime my name is read or seen or heard, people struggle. They struggle to figure out, quote unquote, what I am. They've struggled to figure out how to say my name. And for a long time, I struggled with accepting my given name, but now I'm more than proud to have it.
She only says that because her mom's listening. So she talks to Walter Lick Gibson. They have this discussion, and eventually they find another person attached to possibly where this note came from. And that person's name is John Smith.
Yes.
Now, as Ingrid is going on this search and spending her own money to find a private investigator who's very shady, but she finds a private investigator and finds 2 John Smiths, but only one of them has no alibi for the time that would be the timestamp on the library.
Right.
So she goes to visit this John Smith, who ends up being a massive racist, seemingly.
Yes. Oh, that's like, that scene was so tense. And I was afraid, like, it's so early in the book, but I was afraid for her safety already.
But so that is where she kind of got stumped until her friend Eunice came into this whole mix.
Yes.
Now, Eunice is another grad student.
Yes. She's another grad student, and the reason why they became friends was because they both hated another grad student.
Vivian.
Yes.
But Eunice helps Ingrid then kind of get through this incident of, I guess, failure of not being able to find the right John Smith.
Right.
Ingrid's on the verge of giving up.
Right.
And Eunice has this very cartoonish feel about her.
I guess. I was going to say that rather than cartoonish, she seems to be very bubbly.
There you go. It's just so funny. Like, she has a very, very funny personality, and her actions are very hilarious.
Right. As a foil to Ingrid is very hard on herself, very critical, very afraid, while Eunice is very light and airy and is more concerned about what brings her joy.
Right. And that then leads to Eunice helping Ingrid break into the archival library section so that they can find a donor who's also named John Smith. And this is going to lead us into our next read.
Yes. And, like, this whole thing, even though I don't know whose idea it was. Was it Eunice's or Ingrid's?
Oh, it was Eunice's idea.
For sure.
Yeah, because because they were both high off of a baked good or something. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, Eunice was the one that suggested that they break in.
Totally. And even though Eunice is the one who gave the idea, I don't think she realized how much she would have to invest into it.
Yeah. That's the part that you should definitely read.
Yes.
I think that's one of the things that the author Elaine does so well in this book is it's a very strong mixture of comedy with seriousness.
Yeah.
And it helps the story, for me, it helps the story just flow so easily.
Absolutely. It gives it a rhythm that isn't predictable, but it's also not so chaotic either. It gives you enough freshness in between.
Right. Speaking of which, there's a thing that Elaine includes into the character of Ingrid that is so unnecessary, but it's so funny. And that's the fan fiction. So the librarian's name is Margaret.
Yes.
Her assistant's name is Daryl. And because Ingrid spends so much time in the library having to do work and all these things, she starts creating this love romantic story between Margaret and Daryl.
Yeah.
And it's so funny, and it's just so unnecessary.
Right, and like it's included in the book, and I remember when I first encountered it in the audiobook, I got so confused. I was like, wait, what's happening? Did we jump into a romance novel? But yes, it creates this other perspective or dimension of Ingrid and her lack of interest in her actual dissertation.
Speaking of lack of interest, let's talk about the white men in this book. So, I wrote it down in my notes, the Battle of the White Men. And this is primarily between Stephen and Thad at a party. Stephen is Ingrid's fiance, and Thad is Eunice's new boyfriend.
Yes.
They're both exactly the reason why I don't like going to parties. Because I get stuck in these conversations with people just like this, and it's so infuriating.
For real.
But the way they portray themselves is that Stephen is honestly, sometimes he's kind of right, but talks like he knows it all, which is so infuriating because he doesn't, and that's where he's not right.
Yeah.
And that's just dumb.
Except that he's in tech, so he thinks he's smart too.
Right. Within this party, the text even talks about how Ingrid is avoiding these quote-unquote Asian conversations. There's input from this Vivian character, who we'll talk about a little bit. But there's an input where Vivian says, and this is a quote, "Let me guess," Vivian said dryly, "you got tired of them teaching you about your culture." I don't know. The conversation that was written by Elaine was very much just glimpses into little words of what you would hear.
Right,
kind of like you're not eavesdropping, just overhearing.
Yes.
And it very much sounded like people with yellow fever, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Not maybe. That's definitely people with yellow fever. And the fact that Stephen Green is a translator for Japanese texts.
Without knowing Japanese.
And without having ever visited Japan.
Yeah.
That's what his insecurity is, that he has never visited Japan and therefore he's a fraud. And I'm like, he is a fraud. He is a white man translating Japanese text without knowing the language.
Or the culture.
Or the people.
Yeah. It also includes this scene where Michael Bartholomew joins in on the conversation.
Yes.
Which then just gets more Anglo.
Yes.
And they talk about things like black belts and I don't know, I'm sure Kung Fu. Having
like very random anything Asian, let's add it into the conversation.
Like how well they use chopsticks, having samurai swords in their house.
Exactly, the kinds of foods that they enjoy because of the different spices.
The scrolls on their walls.
Jesus.
We could go on and on. It was a very funny...
question mark?
Funny question mark part of this book just because it was so relatable.
Yes, absolutely.
Then there's the relationship of Ingrid and Vivian.
Which is a very contentious relationship. The reason why Ingrid and Eunice are friends are because of Vivian and because they despise her.
Right. And I don't know, Vivian doesn't seem that bad.
She's not terrible as a person, but I feel like you just mentioned, her coming up to Eunice and Ingrid and saying that they sent away the white men. The fact that she points so hard at the truth, I think, is what makes them not like her.
I think I don't dislike Vivian because I relate so hard to Vivian.
I feel like who I am now is very related to Vivian.
Yes. I think that blunt honesty is what I've become.
For sure.
I feel like I've turned 70 over the last 5 years within the time of COVID, and now I'm just like, I'm just going to say things. Vivian's not wrong in most of the things that she does or says.
No.
She's a hard worker.
Yes. She
is on top of her game, which is why she has so many publications and things like that. She's the person that my parents would have wanted me to be. I think one of the reasons why Ingrid and maybe Eunice are against Vivian is because she's that cousin.
Right.
She's that cousin that your parents are like, oh, you know, your
Comparing
cousin,
her to,
your cousin went here. Your cousin did this. Did you know that your cousin helped the president defeat the war people? I don't know. Like, she is that person because she's so good at everything.
Right.
She's also pretty cool. Like, it shows that she's dating someone that's on a motorcycle.
Exactly.
And then Ingrid sees Vivian hop on the back of the motorcycle like she's in this really cool movie.
Yes.
So I don't hate her. I think she's really cool.
Either. I definitely have a lot of respect for Vivian. The fact that she knows what she wants and she's gonna say whatever it is that's on her mind and say it without being malicious. She's not being malicious towards them when maybe she is. I don't know.
Yeah, like the side eye, the undercutting kind of malicious.
Yeah. Like the frenemy type thing.
Yeah.
But like we said, there's truth in what she's saying, and it's not truth that's supposed to hurt, it's just truth that is there.
Right. So I'm sure that Vivian is going to be a part of a lot of this, because they're also both studying the same dissertation-ish. Yeah. They're not doing the exact same topic, but they're studying the same author for sure.
Yes.
We are definitely going to find out more about Steven. I mean, it's on the back cover.
Yeah.
It shows that she's having an identity crisis with her relationship involved.
Mm-hmm.
We are hopefully going to find out who this John Smith is. Mm-hmm. But what are your predictions about what's going to happen next?
I initially thought that this John Smith character, the whole side quest was going to be such a small and quick thing. But it's turning into such a big ordeal that I feel like even within the next part, within part 2 of the winter quarter, we still won't know who John Smith is. I feel like we're still going to hit dead ends, but move just an inch closer to who this person really is.
I kind of agree that this John Smith thing is going to go on for a while. I don't think it's going to be the whole story.
Maybe not.
I definitely think that Ingrid and Steven are going to break up. And I truly think it's probably because he has a PH instead of a V for his name.
Do you think they're going to break up already in the next part?
In the next part, no.
Okay.
I think it's the 3rd or 4th part.
So you're seeing way into the future
seeing
of the
way
book.
Into the future.
Gotcha.
I think more immediately, the next few segments are going to be about John Smith. I'm hoping that it comes out in the next chapter of who he is. I think Vivian's an ongoing story, and I think she ends up becoming a friend of Ingrid's in the very end.
I think so, too.
But we won't know until we read it.
Yes.
So, what are we reading next?
Next, for those who are following along in the hardcover, we're reading pages 83 to 162, and for everyone, we're finishing part 1 and going into part 2 from chapters 6 through 9, which is Kumquats on an Autumn Day to Special Occasion Roleplay.
Right.
What a rhyme.
Right. And so we are going to be reading through it. We're hoping that you join along. And for anyone that wants to reach out to us or contact us or just let us know your thoughts, how can people reach us?
You can email us at asianbookclubpod@gmail.com. You can also reach us through our DMs on Instagram or comment on one of our posts at asianbookclubpod.
Right. And we also have a website, asianbookclubpod.com, which also has our bookshop, which shares the books that we've read and other recommendations that we have for you.
Yep.
Please remember to follow, like, and subscribe.
Yes, please.
And otherwise, also make sure to be happy, be healthy, and read a book.
Ingat.
Bye.